Nathan Caldwell had not planned on saving anyone that Tuesday morning. He had planned in precise order to arrive at Caldwell Capital's 43rd floor by 7:15, review the acquisition files his assistant had left on his desk the previous night, sign 3 contracts before the markets opened in New York, and avoid human interaction for as long as professionally possible. He had done the same thing every Tuesday for the past 4 years. The routine was not cold. It was simply efficient. Nathan had learned early in life that efficiency was the only honest form of discipline, and discipline was the only thing that had ever truly belonged to him. He stepped into the elevator at the underground parking garage at 6:58, carrying a black leather portfolio and a coffee he had not yet opened. The building was nearly empty at that hour. The lobby security guard, a quiet man named Harold who had worked there for 11 years, gave him a small nod. Nathan nodded back. That was the extent of his morning social life, and he had no complaints about it. The elevator doors closed. What happened next was not part of the plan. The elevator stopped on the 18th floor, an unremarkable floor occupied by a mid-sized accounting firm, a small immigration law office, and a shared conference room that smelled faintly of burned coffee and anxiety. Nathan looked up from the acquisition file he had opened against the portfolio when the doors parted, expecting nothing. What he found was a young woman pressing herself into the back corner of the hallway with both hands, clutching the strap of a canvas bag, her eyes wide and fixed on something he could not yet see. She was perhaps 26 or 27, with light brown hair that had come loose from whatever had been holding it, framing her face in uneven waves. She wore a pale beige sweater and dark trousers that were slightly too long, the hems brushing the floor. There was a small gold pendant at her collarbone. None of these details mattered. What mattered was the expression on her face, something between terror and the specific kind of stillness a person holds when they are trying very hard not to cry in public. Behind her, coming down the hallway with the loose confidence of someone who had never once doubted his right to take up space, was a man in his 40s, well-dressed, familiar, in the way that unpleasant things become familiar when you've spent enough time in corporate buildings. Nathan didn't know his name. He knew the type precisely. "Clara," the man was saying, his voice low and controlled in a way that was designed to sound reasonable. "You're being dramatic. We can talk about this like adults." The woman, Clara, said nothing. Her jaw was tight. "All I'm saying," the man continued, still walking toward her, "is that you don't want to make this difficult. Not when your contract review is coming up in 2 weeks. Nathan watched the elevator doors begin to close and pressed the button to hold them open. Clara's eyes jumped to him. It lasted less than a second, but in that second something shifted, like a question being asked without words. "Good morning," Nathan said, looking directly at her. "I'm sorry I'm late. Are you ready to head up?" The hallway went quiet. Clara stared at him. The man behind her stopped walking. "The meeting," Nathan continued, stepping slightly out of the elevator and holding the door with one hand. He kept his voice completely neutral, the same tone he used when offering a counter-proposal at a negotiating table. No urgency, no performance, just certainty. "Mr. Patterson has been waiting since 7. There was no meeting. There was no Mr. Patterson. Nathan had said the first reasonable-sounding name that occurred to him. Clara looked at him for exactly 2 more seconds. Then she straightened, pulled the canvas bag higher on her shoulder, and walked toward the elevator with the careful composure of someone who had just made a very fast decision. She stepped inside. Nathan followed. The doors closed. Neither of them spoke as the elevator rose. At the 31st floor, Clara exhaled. A long, controlled breath that she had clearly been holding since the 18th floor. Her hands released the bag strap. She pressed them flat against her thighs, and Nathan noticed they were trembling slightly, the way hands do when adrenaline has nowhere left to go. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "No," he agreed. She looked at him sideways. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." He glanced at the floors ticking upward. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." She said it the way people say it when they are not fine at all, but have said it so many times it has become a reflex. "I just need to get out of this building." "Then get out of this building." She turned to look at him more fully. She had hazel eyes, green in the center, brown at the edges, and there was something sharp in them, the sharpness of someone who had been underestimated enough times to have stopped expecting anything different. Just like that? Why not? Because I have a 9 o'clock, because I have files on my desk, because I've been working at Hargrove and Associates for 2 years, and leaving now in the middle of a Tuesday morning would look like you're protecting yourself, Nathan said. She stopped. The elevator reached the lobby. He had overshot her floor entirely. The doors opened onto the main lobby, tall ceilings, pale marble, the quiet hum of a building waking up. Clara stepped out, then seemed to realize where she was, and turned back. She had the expression of someone recalibrating. "This is the lobby," she said. "Yes. I was going to 30. You said you wanted to get out of the building." She stared at him. Then, to his mild surprise, something at the corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile exactly. It was the ghost of one, the kind that appears when a person is trying not to let it. "I didn't mean literally right this second. You have time to reconsider." He stepped out beside her, set the coffee he had never opened on the edge of a decorative planter, and extended his hand. "Nathan Caldwell." She hesitated. Then she shook it. Her grip was firm. "Clara Weston." "Clara." He nodded once. "The man on the 18th floor, is he your direct supervisor?" Her expression closed slightly. "He manages my department." "Has this happened before?" A pause that was long enough to be an answer. "Not like that," she said carefully. "Usually it's more subtle." Nathan said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that silence, in the right moment, was more useful than any response. Clara looked around the lobby as if orienting herself, as if she were trying to remember where she was, and how she'd gotten there, and what she was supposed to do next. The morning light was pouring in through the front glass, catching the dust motes in the air, giving everything a strange, suspended quality, like a photograph taken mid-motion. "Thank you," she said at last, "for the elevator thing. I don't know what that was, but thank you." "It was a Tuesday morning," Nathan said simply. "Those tend to need some improvisation." She laughed then, a real one, quick and a little startled, as if it had escaped before she could stop it. She pressed one hand briefly over her mouth, then lowered it. Her eyes were different when she laughed, and less guarded, warmer. He noticed this with the same quiet precision. He noticed everything. "I should go back up," she said. "I have a 9 o'clock. You mentioned. And files." "You mentioned that too." She adjusted the strap on her bag, smoothed the front of her sweater. He watched her rebuild the composure she had fractured for that one unguarded moment. It was a practiced process, automatic and a little sad. "Maybe I'll take the stairs," she said, half to herself. "Third door on the left," Nathan offered. She gave him one last look, searching, and careful, and something else he couldn't quite name, then turned and walked toward the stairwell door. She didn't look back. Nathan stood in the lobby for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he picked up his coffee, walked back to the elevator, and pressed 43. The acquisition files were waiting. The contracts needed to be signed. The markets would open in 40 minutes. Everything was exactly as planned. Except that he did not open the coffee, and he did not open the files either. He stood at the tall glass wall of his office and looked out at the city laid flat and bright below him, and thought, for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, about nothing in particular, just a pair of hazel eyes, and a laugh that had gotten loose before she could catch it. Clara Weston had a system. It wasn't complicated, and it wasn't pretty, but it worked. She arrived at the office 8 minutes before anyone else. She made her own coffee. The shared machine on the 18th floor produced something that tasted like regret dissolved in hot water, but it was free, and free mattered. She sat at her desk, which was the second from the window in a row of 6 identical desks, and she opened her files in a specific order. Pending first, urgent second, review third. She answered emails before 9. She never took a lunch break longer than 20 minutes. She was, by every measurable standard, the most reliable junior analyst at Hargrove and Associates. None of it had ever been enough for Richard Calloway. She understood this now more clearly than she ever had before, more clearly than the morning she'd stayed until 11 correcting a report he had submitted with her name removed from the cover page, more clearly than the afternoon he'd interrupted her presentation to a client and finished her sentences in slightly different words, stealing the credit so smoothly that no one in the room had seemed to notice. She understood it most clearly now, sitting at her desk with her canvas bag still on her shoulder and her heart still beating a little too fast, replaying the way Richard had walked down that hallway toward her. "You don't want to make this difficult." She set the bag down. She smoothed the front of her sweater. She opened her pending files. Across the room, her colleague Dana was already at her own desk, headphones around her neck, eating a granola bar over a printed spreadsheet. Dana was 24 and deeply unbothered by most things that bothered Clara. She glanced up. "You look weird." "Good morning to you too." "No, like pale." "Did something happen?" "I'm fine." Dana looked at her for a moment longer, with the specific skepticism of someone who had shared a work floor with Clara for 2 years and knew exactly what "I'm fine" meant coming from her mouth. But she didn't push. She pulled her headphones on and returned to the spreadsheet, and Clara was grateful for that, for Dana's particular brand of loyalty, which expressed itself mostly in knowing when to stop asking. Clara opened the first file. It was a routine audit review for a commercial real estate client, the kind of work she could do in her sleep, which was occasionally how she felt she was doing it. She moved through the numbers with the mechanical precision of long habit, column by column, line by line, and then somewhere around the 3rd page of a subledger she had requested 2 weeks ago and only just received, she found something that did not belong. It was a small thing, a single-line entry, a transfer of funds from a holding account that wasn't listed in the main client profile she'd been given. The amount wasn't extraordinary. The account number meant nothing on its own. But it appeared 3 times at intervals of exactly 45 days, and the recipient code didn't match any vendor or partner in the file documentation. Clara stared at it. Then she looked at the dates. Then she went back to the main ledger and cross-referenced, because she was someone who cross-referenced things even when she had no reason to, because her mother had raised her to check twice and trust carefully. The entry didn't exist in the main ledger, only in the sub-ledger she had specifically requested, and that had taken 2 weeks to arrive, because Richard had told her at the time. The client's accountants were backlogged. She sat back in her chair. Outside the row of windows, the city was fully awake now. Delivery trucks moved below. A pigeon landed on the window ledge, considered its options, and left. The office had filled gradually around her, keyboards clicking, phones ringing at low volume, someone in the back refilling the coffee machine with the focused reverence of a religious ritual. Clara looked at the entry again. She thought about Richard's face that morning in the hallway, the control in it, the way he'd said dramatic, as if her discomfort were a character flaw she needed to correct. She took a photograph of the subledger page with her phone. Then she closed the file. She spent the rest of the morning being, by all outward appearances, completely unremarkable. She attended the 9 o'clock, a routine internal review meeting that Richard ran with the brisk, self-satisfied air of a man who had never once questioned whether he deserved to be in the room. He did not look at her directly. She did not look at him either. She took notes. She asked one clarifying question about client billing cycles, because asking 0 questions would have been conspicuous. She left the meeting when it ended and returned to her desk. At 11:45, she received an email. The sender was listed as N. Caldwell, with a Caldwell capital domain address. The subject line read, "Lunch, 12:30. The place on the corner of 5th with the green awning. No obligation." She read it twice, then she looked it up because she was someone who looked things up. Nathan Caldwell, 34 years old, founder and CEO of Caldwell Capital, a private investment firm with holdings across commercial real estate, renewable energy infrastructure, and regional manufacturing. Worth, according to the most recent estimate she found, somewhere in the range of $4.3 billion. Educated at Princeton, born in Columbus, Ohio, no notable personal profile, no social media presence, no society columns, no charity galas with his name on a trophy. The only photographs she found were from business publications, always in a dark suit, always with the expression of someone tolerating the photograph rather than welcoming it. She sat with her phone in both hands and thought about the lobby that morning. The way he'd said Tuesday mornings tend to need some improvisation, as if it were the most unremarkable thing in the world to rescue a stranger from a hallway and lie to a senior manager without blinking. She thought about the fact that he had found her email. That should have been strange. It occurred to her that it was strange, but she was on the 18th floor of a building where Nathan Caldwell occupied the 43rd, and she had given him her name. And men with $4.3 billion and Princeton educations were not, in her experience, people who encountered obstacles when they wanted to find something. She typed back, "How do you know it has a green awning?" His reply came in 40 seconds. "I own the building." She stared at that for a long moment. Then she put her phone in her bag, told Dana she was stepping out for lunch, and left. The restaurant, if it could be called that, it was really more of a narrow room with good light and 4 small tables, smelled like fresh bread and rosemary. Nathan was already there, seated at the table farthest from the window, jacket off, the same quiet self-containment about him that she remembered from the elevator. He stood when she came in, which she hadn't expected, and gestured to the chair across from him. "You came," he said. "I wasn't going to," she told him honestly, sitting down. "What changed your mind?" She considered lying, then decided it wasn't worth the energy. "I found something in a file this morning, something I don't know what to do with yet, and I needed to be somewhere that wasn't the 18th floor." He looked at her steadily. He had dark eyes, not black exactly, but very close, and they held the particular quality of someone who listened the way most people didn't, which was to say, completely. "Tell me about the file," he said. "I don't know you." "You know my name. You looked me up." She didn't ask how he knew that. "The file is a client audit. There are entries in a sub-ledger that don't match the main account, recurring transfers. The amounts aren't large enough to be obvious, but the pattern—" She stopped. "I don't know what it means yet." "But you know it's wrong." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. The waiter brought water and bread, and neither of them touched it. "Does Calloway have access to the sub-ledgers for that client?" Nathan asked. Clara went very still. She had not mentioned Richard's name. She looked across the table at Nathan Caldwell, and for the first time that morning, she felt something that was not quite fear but was close to it, a shift in the air, the particular sensation of realizing that a situation is larger than it first appeared. "How do you know his name?" she asked quietly. Nathan's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Something careful and deliberate and unmistakably intentional. "Clara," he said, setting both hands flat on the table. "There are some things I need to tell you about why I was on your floor this morning." The bread sat untouched between them. The rosemary smell that had seemed warm and welcoming when Clara first walked in now felt strangely distant, as if the room had shifted slightly on its axis without moving at all. "Start from the beginning," she said. Her voice was steady. She had learned, through 2 years of working under Richard Calloway, how to keep her voice steady when everything else wasn't. Nathan looked at her for a moment, not the way men usually looked at her, which was to say briefly and with mild assessment, but with the focused attention of someone deciding exactly how much to say and in precisely what order. She had the impression that he organized his words the way she organized her files, deliberately, and with a clear sense of what belonged where. "Caldwell Capital has been trying to acquire a commercial real estate portfolio for the past 8 months, he began. "A collection of mixed-use properties across 4 states, solid assets, undervalued, the kind of acquisition that doesn't come along often. The seller is a holding company called Meridian Group." He paused. "Meridian's accounts are managed by Hargrove and Associates." Clara kept her face neutral. "That's a common enough arrangement." "It is. What's less common is that every time our due diligence team requested documentation from Meridian, standard financial records, transfer histories, vendor contracts, the files we received were incomplete. Not obviously, not in ways that would immediately raise a flag to someone reviewing quickly, but incomplete." He turned his water glass slowly on the table. 3 months ago, I hired an outside auditor to review what we'd been given. She found gaps, Small ones, consistent ones, the kind that suggests someone with access to the accounts has been managing what gets seen and what doesn't. Richard manages the Meridian account, Clara said. She heard the flatness in her own voice. Yes. And the subledger I was looking at this morning is the one your firm holds for Meridian's primary holding structure. Yes. She sat back. The pieces were not complicated, and they were actually very simple, which was often the way with dishonest things. Simple and carefully hidden. You think he's been skimming, moving money out through accounts that don't appear in the standard documentation. My auditor thinks the transfers you found this morning are consistent with that, yes. Your auditor. Clara looked at him directly. Nathan, how does your auditor know about transfers I found this morning? I found them this morning. I photographed the page at approximately 9:45. The question landed between them with the particular weight of something that had been inevitable since she sat down. Nathan did not look away. My auditor has been working with someone inside Hargrove for the past 6 weeks, someone who had access to request the subledger documentation and flag it when it arrived. The silence that followed was not comfortable. Clara counted 4 seconds of it before she trusted herself to speak. Who? Dana Reyes. Clara's hands, which had been folded on the table with great composure, went still. Dana, who had been eating a granola bar over a spreadsheet that morning, who had looked at Clara with 2 years' worth of quiet loyalty and asked did something happen, and then, when Clara said she was fine, had put her headphones on and said nothing else. Dana, who had specifically recommended, Clara now recalled, with the eerie clarity of a memory that suddenly makes sense, that Clara be the one to request the Meridian subledger. You're better at catching discrepancies than I am, Dana had said. You always see things I miss. She's been working with you, Clara said slowly. She came to us, Nathan said. 6 weeks ago, she'd noticed the pattern herself but didn't have the authority to access the documents she needed. She needed someone who could request the subledger without raising suspicion. He paused. She said you were the only person in that office she trusted to look at it carefully and not let it go. Clara thought about that. She thought about Dana's particular brand of loyalty and how she had perhaps misunderstood its shape. And this morning? She asked. The elevator, the hallway, you showing up on the 18th floor at 7 in the morning, that wasn't an accident. No. You were there to watch, to see if Calloway made a move. We believed he may have realized the subledger had been requested. We thought he might try to pressure whoever had access to it. Nathan's voice was careful but not apologetic. I didn't expect to find you backed into a corner in the hallway. But you weren't surprised. He considered this with more honesty than she expected. I wasn't entirely surprised, Mituli admitted. No. Clara looked at the table. She looked at the bread, still untouched, going slightly cold between them. She thought about everything she had arranged her life around for the past 2 years. The 8-minute early arrivals, the 20-minute lunch breaks, the careful, invisible competence she had poured into a job that had always given slightly less back than she put in. She thought about her name missing from that report cover. She thought about finished sentences and redirected credit, and a man in a hallway telling her she was being dramatic. How much? She asked quietly. How much do you think he's moved? Our auditor's current estimate is somewhere between 800,000 and 1.2 million, spread over approximately 3 years, small enough transfers to avoid automatic flags, large enough over time to matter. Clara closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, then she opened them. What do you need from me? Something in Nathan's expression shifted, subtle, barely visible, but there. A loosening of something that had been held very tightly. The subledger you photographed this morning, and any other documentation from the Meridian file that you can legitimately access before the end of the week. Legitimately, she repeated. I won't ask you to do anything that puts you at risk. Accessing client files is part of my job, she said. I can pull everything on Meridian that falls within my current assignments, without anyone questioning it, Richard included. She paused. Especially Richard. He thinks I don't see things. Do you? See things? She met his eyes. I saw the discrepancy in 45 minutes on a Tuesday morning, she said simply. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully name. Not admiration exactly, though it contained some of that. Something quieter, more considered, the way a person looks at something they have underestimated and are now recalibrating accordingly. They talked for another 40 minutes. Clara ate half the bread. Nathan drank his water and answered her questions, all of them, without evasion, which she noted and appreciated more than she expected to. By the time she looked at her phone and registered that it was almost 2 o'clock, she had a clear picture of what had been happening inside the Meridian account and a reasonable understanding of what came next. She also had, though she would not have said this aloud to anyone, the unsettling awareness that something about this lunch had not been entirely professional, not in the way she needed to worry about. Nathan had been nothing but direct and measured throughout. But there were moments. The way he refilled her water without being asked, the way he'd waited until she finished a thought before responding every single time. Small things, unremarkable on their own. She filed them away and did not examine them. She stood to leave. He stood too. Clara. He said her name with the same quiet precision he used for everything. What Calloway said to you this morning, about your contract review? She stiffened slightly. I handled it. I know you did. He paused. I want you to know that regardless of what happens with the Meridian documentation, regardless of how this resolves, what he said to you this morning was not acceptable, and it will not be without consequences. She looked at him. You don't work at my firm. No, he said, but I own the building. She remembered his email. I own the building. She had thought it was a joke, a dry, self-aware little comment from a man who found himself amusing. She realized now it had been a quiet form of reassurance, a way of saying, you are not as unprotected as you think. She picked up her bag. I'll have the files to your auditor by Friday, she said. Thank you. She walked to the door, then stopped, turned back. He was still standing at the table, jacket off, watching her go with that same expression she couldn't quite name and had stopped trying to. Nathan, she said, this morning in the lobby, when you gave me your coffee. He looked momentarily uncertain, the first time she had seen anything like uncertainty in his face. I didn't give you set it on the planter, she said. You had been carrying it all morning. You never opened it, and you left it there. She tilted her head slightly. Why? He was quiet for just a moment too long. Tuesday mornings, he said finally. She almost smiled. Right. She walked out into the afternoon light and did not let herself look back, and thought about the space between what people said and what they meant, and how sometimes those two things were separated by the thinnest possible distance. Behind her, inside the narrow restaurant with the green awning, Nathan Caldwell sat back down at the table and looked at the empty chair across from him for a long, quiet moment. Then he picked up his phone and called his auditor, but he didn't speak immediately when she answered. He was thinking about hazel eyes and a laugh that had gotten loose before she could catch it, and the feeling, distant and unfamiliar and not entirely unwelcome, that something had already begun to change. The week moved the way weeks do when something important is quietly happening beneath the surface of ordinary things, faster than it should, and with a strange, muffled quality, as if the world had turned down its own volume to make room for whatever was coming. Clara went back to the office on Tuesday afternoon and sat at her desk and pulled every document related to the Meridian account that fell within her legitimate scope of work. She did it methodically over 3 days, in the precise manner of someone doing exactly what their job required. She requested files the way she always requested files, with brief professional emails and clear audit justifications. She cross-referenced. She flagged discrepancies in her own internal notes with the same neutral language she used for everything. She built, without calling it that, a record. Richard Calloway walked past her desk on Wednesday morning and paused. She felt him pause before she looked up. He was holding a coffee mug and wearing the expression he used when he wanted to appear relaxed and did not quite manage it. "How's the Meridian review coming?" he asked. "On schedule," she said. He looked at her desk, at the open files, at the orderly, unremarkable surface of a junior analyst doing her work. "Good," he said. After a moment, Let me know if you hit any snags. Of course, she said. He walked away. Dana, from across the row of desks, did not look up from her screen, but she reached sideways and set a wrapped granola bar on the edge of Clara's desk without a word. Clara looked at it for a moment. Then she unwrapped it and ate it, and that was how they acknowledged between them everything that was happening and everything that was not being said. On Friday morning, Clara sent a sealed document package to the outside auditor. A woman named Patricia Holt, who had a calm, businesslike email manner and asked excellent questions and thanked Clara in exactly 2 sentences. By Friday afternoon, Clara's phone buzzed with a message from a number she had saved under simply NC. Patricia received everything. "Thank you," she typed back. "Don't thank me yet." His reply, "I already am." She stared at that for longer than was strictly necessary. The following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the elevator, the hallway, the green awning, Richard Calloway was escorted from the building by 2 men from the firm's legal department and a representative from the State Financial Regulatory Office, who had been quietly contacted by Patricia Holt's firm the previous Thursday with a preliminary findings report. The process was efficient and undramatic in the way that institutional consequences usually are. No raised voices, no confrontation in the hallway, just a closed-door meeting at 8 in the morning and an empty desk by 9:15. Clara sat at her own desk and watched the empty chair where Richard had been and felt more than anything else tired, not the tired of someone who had lost something, the tired of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally, quietly, been allowed to set it down. Dana put a coffee on her desk, a real one, from the place on the ground floor, not the shared machine. "You okay?" Dana asked. "Yes," Clara said, and this time she meant it. Nathan called that afternoon, not a message, an actual phone call, which felt strangely formal, like a letter arriving in an age of emails. "How are you?" he asked. "Honestly, relieved," she said, "and slightly afraid of what happens next." "What do you mean?" She was standing at the window in the 18th floor break room, looking out at the city below. From this angle, she could see the green awning of the restaurant on the corner of 5th. "I've been the reliable, invisible one for 2 years," she said. "I don't entirely know who I am when the thing I've been pushing against isn't there anymore." A pause. "I think you might be surprised." "By what?" "By how much space you take up," he said, "when there's nothing in the way." She didn't answer immediately. She watched a yellow cab pull away from the curb below and thought about space and the things that fill it and the things that shouldn't. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "The morning in the elevator, before you knew anything about me, before you decided I was useful to your investigation or whatever the appropriate word is." She paused. "Why did you step out? You could have let the doors close. Most people would have." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind of silence that has something in it. "I don't know," he said. "I just didn't want to." It was not a complicated answer. It was, in fact, an extremely simple one, but it landed with the particular weight of something simple that is also completely true, and Clara had spent enough time around complicated dishonesty to know the difference. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated. "Okay," she said again, and she could hear, very faintly, something change in his breathing on the other end of the line. A loosening. The same thing she had seen in his face in the restaurant when she had agreed to help. That carefully held thing releasing, just slightly. They had dinner 2 weeks later. Not at the narrow restaurant with the green awning that had become, without either of them saying so, a place that belonged to a different part of the story. They went to a quieter place in the West Village, where the tables were far enough apart for real conversation and the lighting was warm without being deliberate about it. Nathan arrived first. He stood when she came in, the same way he had in the restaurant on 5th, and she thought about how that small, old-fashioned courtesy had surprised her the first time and now felt already familiar. They talked for 3 hours, not about Meridian, not about Richard or Patricia or the regulatory report. They talked about other things, his childhood in Columbus, Ohio, Where his father had worked in manufacturing and money had been something the family discussed the way other families discussed weather, as something that came and went and couldn't be fully controlled. Her childhood in Portland, Oregon, where her mother had been a high school English teacher who read aloud at the dinner table and believed deeply in the importance of noticing things. They talked about the specific loneliness of being good at something that other people don't see. They talked about what it felt like to build something and what it felt like to almost lose it. Somewhere in the second hour, Clara said something that made Nathan laugh. A real laugh, the kind she suspected he didn't produce easily or often, and the sound of it was warm and a little rough and entirely unguarded. She filed it away the way he had, that first morning, filed away her laugh, carefully, as something worth keeping. Near the end of the evening, he said something that stopped her mid-sentence. He had been talking about the acquisition, the Meridian portfolio, which was now proceeding cleanly, the documentation in order, the legal complications resolving, and he paused and he looked at the table and then he said very quietly, "I've been doing this for 10 years, building things, acquiring things, making decisions and moving on." Another pause. There hasn't been anyone who made me want to stop moving." The sentence did not finish itself. He left it there, open, the way honest things sometimes have to be left. Clara looked at him across the table. This man who owned buildings and hired auditors and had stepped out of an elevator on a Tuesday morning for no reason he could fully explain. And she thought about what she was supposed to say. She thought about the careful, measured response, the one that protected her, the one that didn't ask too much of the moment. Then she thought about her mother reading aloud at the dinner table, about the importance of noticing things. "You stopped," she said simply. "On the 18th floor, you stopped." He looked up at her. "That's enough," she said. "For now, that's enough to start with." Something in his face did the thing she had noticed twice before, the loosening, the careful thing releasing. But this time it was different. This time, it was complete. He looked at her the way people look at something they had almost walked past and caught themselves just in time, with the particular mix of relief and disbelief that belongs to that specific kind of close call. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she agreed. Outside, the West Village hummed quietly around them. A couple walked past the window with a dog on a leash. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing music low enough to feel more than hear. The city did what cities do at night, held everything and gave nothing away. Clara picked up her glass. Nathan picked up his. They didn't make a toast. There was nothing to perform. They simply sat together in the warm light of a Tuesday evening. Two people who had, against all reasonable expectation, found each other in a hallway on the 18th floor and chose, with full awareness of what they were doing, to stay. The coffee he had left on the planter that first morning had been cold by the time anyone found it. A small, forgotten thing. An offering, maybe, to a Tuesday that had turned out to need very little improvisation after all. Just the willingness to stop and the courage to begin.